I came in the morning after it started. I was off duty when it started. Knew through the information text lines that we get at home that something was going on, but had no idea really what, because it's December and I'm driving in to my regular assignment in December and see a huge column of smoke off toward in Upper Ojai above us. So I thought, wow, I wonder if this is how I'm going to spend my Christmas, kind of jokingly, because I never had any idea. I knew it's been dry and hot. I didn't think it was going to get as big or as bad as it did, So I had several experiences. Came into my regular station that day and immediately got sent from here on my Type 1 engine to cover Ventura City, which had already experienced their major impacts from the fire the night before. So that had already happened because it happened so quick. So now we covered the city of Ventura for half the day, and then oddly got sent on what was thought to be a new fire northbound on the 101 in the oil field kind of above the city of Ventura. So we went to this fire and they named it. They did not call it the Thomas Fire. They called it the Vintage Incident, and they sent us there. And we're driving there and I'm thinking to myself, this is the Thomas Fire. But no one realized how far it had progressed in that direction. Everyone was so focused on the Ventura City side that they hadn't realized that somehow along the lines it had spotted and gone in the direction that had gone. So we show up on what is being called a totally new incident, and we get there and we're by ourselves with a battalion chief and what looked to be a several mile long fire front off in the distance, heading our way. And the chief kind of says, yeah, well, this is yours, you'll be a vintage IC, and get back to me with what you need. Meanwhile, there's no resources available, and the Thomas Fire is completely doing its thing in the Ventura City side. And so we kind of chuckled at it. So we'll just kind of babysit this and see what becomes of it, because I had no resources available. I have no connection to the Thomas incident at the time. So there was a very odd scenario that I had never been a part of, and I'm a fairly new captain, so this is a new one for me, right? So we kind of babysat that spot along Highway 101, and as it progressed and got closer, and we did some minor actions. There's a lot of oil fields up there, and that's who initially called us, was the oil field company. So we kind of did some protective action, but there's so much fire and it was such a long distance and area. We were one engine company, literally. So we're like, all right, we're not doing any good here. We're just gonna now I'm gonna start notifying people. The funny thing is, no one in the Thomas Fire knew that part of the fire had even existed. At the same time, another part of kind of the city of Ventura was being impacted, and lower Ojai area, Creek Road, was being heavily impacted and structures were being threatened. So all the resources were now concentrated there. Meanwhile, there's a large portion of the Thomas Fire moving towards Highway 101 in Carpinteria that no one knew about. So that was kind of my experience. Finally, I made contact with someone who I knew was a PIO on the incident, and him and another friend of mine, another engine captain who's based down at 25s on Highway 101, made contact and said, hey, this is going on down here. What's the plan? And no one knew about it. So it took several hours, several phone calls to finally get someone from the incident to Highway 101. And by this time, it had reached Highway 101 and jumped Highway 101 in a small part, and we were able to keep that part corralled. Finally, we got a member of the Thomas incident. I think the team was transitioning at that time a little bit, which is always kind of a watch out, right? Who showed up and kind of looked around and said, wow, I had no idea this was even out here, and now it's, we were making notifications that certain communities along the 101 needed to be evacuated. So that finally I got a hold of our department and said, hey, this is not the Vintage incident. This is the Thomas Fire. And now we all recognize that it is part of the Thomas Fire. And so I was no longer Vintage IC. So the joke amongst friends is they call me Vintage IC sometimes. They're like one guy standing, 3 guys standing in a 5, 10, 15 mile wall of fire, So that was our first experience. And after that, things got situated. We had a little help that evening. Not much, and kind of protected parts of the 101 and the railroad and a small community there, and and we're okay, you know, kind of did what we could that night. The communities that we talked about were eventually evacuated that night, and you know, the people realized like, oh, this thing is way bigger than we even thought, because everyone was just so drawn so thin that, and things were happening in other parts of the fire that were just so intense that wasn't even, at that point, even if they knew about it, wasn't a high priority. They wouldn't have sent it, because it's all oil fields out there and just open country until it gets to the 101. Now it's a railroad and 101, major thoroughfare, and several communities along the way, which ultimately did get impacted that night. So that was kind of day one for us.